We use it every single day, but how often do we actually stop and think about language itself? I don't just mean the words, but the incredible, complex machinery working behind the scenes. Well, today, we're going to pull back that curtain on the study of language, and you'll see how it went from being just a simple rulebook to a full-blown science.
So let's kick things off with a question that might just challenge everything you learned in English class. We were all taught about good grammar, right? Those rules like don't end a sentence with a preposition. But what if those rules are just one tiny piece of a much, much bigger and way more fascinating puzzle?
To even begin to answer that, we've got to get our terms straight. We need to define the field that looks at language not as a set of rules to follow, but as a subject for real scientific investigation.
And that field, my friends, is linguistics. Now, a super common mistake is thinking a linguist is just someone who speaks a ton of languages. But that's not quite it. A linguist is really more like a biologist. Think about it. A biologist doesn't have to be a jellyfish to study how jellyfish work, right? In the same way, a linguist studies the system, the structure, the nuts and bolts, and the evolution behind any and all human languages. They're basically scientists of language.
But here's the thing. This whole scientific approach is actually pretty new. So to really understand modern linguistics, we have to hop in a time machine and meet its ancestors, the fields that laid all the groundwork. First up, we have philology. You should think of philologists as the original language detectives. Seriously. They're the ones digging through ancient scrolls and dusty manuscripts, comparing texts to trace the family trees of languages. They're piecing together history from the clues left behind in writing.
And then there's traditional grammar. So if the philologists were the detectives, the traditional grammarians were the judges. Their goal wasn't really to understand how language worked, but to set the standard for it, to decide what was correct and what was improper, usually based on how the most educated, elite people spoke.
So for centuries, these two approaches were basically the whole game. But then, right around the early 20th century, something revolutionary happened. A massive shift in thinking that completely turned the entire field on its head. It was a move away from making up rules and towards simply observing what was actually going on.
And this timeline shows that evolution so clearly. We start way back with the ancient detectives of philology. Then you see in the 18th century, the rule makers of traditional grammar really take over. But all of that was leading up to this huge breaking point in the 20th century, the birth of modern scientific linguistics.
This slide nails the core difference perfectly. Traditional grammar is prescriptive, like a doctor's prescription. It tells you what you should do. It's judgmental. Modern linguistics, on the other hand, is descriptive. It's objective. It doesn't pass judgment. It just describes how people actually use language in the real world.
So with this new scientific mindset came some powerful new tools for analysis. Two totally different lenses for looking at language. And a really great way to think about them is to compare a snapshot photo to a full-length movie.
To make this even clearer, let's borrow a classic analogy from the world of linguistics. Just imagine for a second that language is a game of chess. The way you choose to study that game can tell us everything about these two new scientific lenses.
And here they are. A synchronic analysis is the snapshot. It's like freezing a chessboard mid-game and analyzing the state of play right now, at this one single moment. A diachronic analysis, though, that's the movie. It's studying how the game of chess has changed over hundreds of years, how the rules themselves evolved, why the pieces move the way they do now. Both are totally valid, scientific ways to study the system.
All right, so all of this leads us to the big so what question. Why does this even matter? Why is this shift from making rules to just scientifically observing language such a big deal?
Well, here's what we get. By being descriptive, not prescriptive, we get to study language without judging it. And this is huge. It means we can recognize that all dialects, every single one, have their own complex, valid systems of rules. So from a linguistic point of view, saying y'all isn't wrong, it's just a different and equally logical system. This whole approach transforms language from just a list of rules you have to obey into a profound window into how the human mind actually works.
And ultimately, that's the real takeaway here. Language isn't just some static collection of do's and don'ts that you memorize from a textbook. It is a living, breathing, evolving system that gives us one of the clearest views we will ever get into the very structure of human thought itself.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We've just seen how our understanding of something as basic as language can completely flip on its head when we shift from prescribing rules to describing reality. So, what other rules that we all take for granted in our lives might just be waiting for a new, more scientific perspective to show us what's really going on.